pleased to welcome today on July 23rd, 2018, a new guest appearing for the first time, retired Special Agent Michael Dick, formerly with the FBI, and Mike is also a decorated U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel. He served overseas in combat in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Mike, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
You're welcome, Jason, and I want to thank you for having me on this evening, and I want to thank you for helping America learn the injustice that's within certain branches of our U.S. government and helping everyone to try to work to clean up the injustices and make our government a better place.
It's really staggering, Mike. You know, we hear about people like yourself. I can't imagine someone who has gone to greater lengths to dedicate their life to protecting the people of the United States. Forgive me, I failed to mention you were also a first responder on 9/11. So that really makes the story you're about to tell us even worse, because I think it's difficult for a lot of people to imagine an FBI that is vindictive and lashes out at individuals. But of course, with someone like yourself, it's just staggering. Why don't you give us a little bit of background, tell us exactly what it is that's gone on?
Well, I served in the U.S. Army for about 11 years before I joined the FBI. I became a special agent in the FBI in 1996, and I was assigned to the New York metropolitan area in the Newark division, the Newark, New Jersey division. I was honored and I was privileged to have served a total of 21 years. I retired in October of 2017. The FBI allowed me to retire as part of a settlement agreement. And that settlement agreement came about after 3 years of civil litigation where I sued the FBI for $11 million and I prevailed. There are still parts of that settlement agreement that have yet to be completed and fulfilled by the FBI and the Department of Justice, but we're working through those right now through my attorneys.
And in deference to that, if there's anything that I bring up that you feel uncomfortable discussing, just say that and we'll move on to another topic. Now, Mike, you, of course, you and I were introduced by Robin Gritz. You worked alongside Robin in the FBI. She's been, as everyone watching Crowdsource the Truth knows, basically brutalized by Andrew McCabe and some of the other, James Comey, the leadership there at the FBI. Can you give us an outsider, well, I mean, you're an insider, but not Robin herself, obviously. What's your perspective on what happened to her?
Well, I first met Robin somewhere around 1998, I believe. It was 98 or 99. She had just joined the Bureau, and she was assigned to the Newark division. And I had been working counterintelligence operations in the New York metro area, and she was assigned to the Newark's Joint Terrorist Task Force. And on occasion, when we would come across individuals of interest to the other squads, we'd do a handoff of that person, whether it be a source, development, or investigative case. And Robin and I got to know each other because I did a handoff of an informant that was providing information relative to counterterrorism operations. And my focus at that time was specifically CI. So I did the handoff. I got to know Robin very well. Hard charger, very dedicated and patriotic individual, and integrity beyond reproach. Her work ethic was almost unsustainable. The hours she kept on the job were just incredible. And later on, you actually know, I think you know, and Robin described too in some of her podcasts, the toll it placed on her marriage, working those long hours. But I knew Robin throughout all the years, working with her. We worked on a lot of critical cases together. And I was sometime around 2011. I was teaching at the FBI's Counterintelligence Training Center at Quantico and at the FBI Academy. And she had called me, and she was extremely stressed on the phone about an issue she was having with a coworker and a superior and someone that was above her. So I asked her to come down and explain the situation, and she did. And in the course of that, I pretty much came to a determination that it was a personality conflict between her and her first line supervisor.
May I
And
guess
so,
who that
sure,
person might have been?
yeah, he was in the supervisory chain. I didn't know the role that he played in targeting her for destruction until a few years later. But initially, it was a personality clash between her and her first line supervisor. I worked with my unit chief and the assistant director of the counterintelligence division to get her a lateral transfer, to get her out of that aspect. And it was basically two very strong-willed individuals I saw that were very patriotic, very effective, very professional, bumping heads, and that happens on occasion, in all industries.
Right.
So I worked to get her removed, to get her reassigned to the counterintelligence division, and my assistant director at the time welcomed her with open arms because of her work ethic and her work product, and they were happy to have her. And so we had everything in alignment for her just to do a lateral transfer over to our unit, over to our division, and to escape this conflict. But what ensued after that was essentially a lot of outright blatant acts which were clear and clear violations of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. And she was discriminated against, and she was targeted for destruction. There was a series of interviews that the Office of Inspector General did, along with the Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR, inside the FBI, that were trying to find dirt on Robin, basically.
Wow.
There's a whole series of things that they did, a small core group of individuals that were all in collusion with each other, in collaboration with each other, to make sure that she basically would be fired. And I saw that, and I just couldn't believe it. At some point in their efforts to target her, targeting her so that they could terminate her employment, I was called up for an interview at FBI headquarters, and in that interview, it became hostile for whatever reason.
Wow.
And they made every effort to try to find some kind of dirt on Robin that essentially wasn't there. And then when they found that I was not about to make any type of statements that would be derogatory, that were false against her, they then targeted me for destruction.
Now, Mike, let me pause you for a second, because you seem to be describing a modus operandi that is remarkably similar to what is happening to President Donald Trump and his various associates at this very moment.
Correct. The group of individuals that I know firsthand that focused their efforts to destroy Robin Gritz were at the time mid-level to junior level FBI supervisors inside of FBI headquarters. And those individuals later grew in authority and in prominence and in positions of authority that led them to formulate what I believe is this false narrative that they have going on against the current President of the United States, Donald Trump. So that same group of people, they're by name, they're listed. I know that Robin and the Office of Inspector General have their names. It's the same core group of 12 to 16 individuals that was targeting Robin, ironically, and then Michael Flynn with the same core. It's the same core group of people that's spinning around this beehive of nefarious activity, criminal conduct, I believe, and outright unethical conduct.
Wow.
And it hasn't stopped. And I'm just perplexed that it's gone on for this long. I really am. One of the things I should say, I wanted to make sure I press upon this to your listeners and all those watching tonight, is that they should feel comfortable that the FBI has thousands of patriotic individuals in its ranks that will do the right thing and will not succumb to political pressure. There are thousands of FBI agents and support employees in that organization today that will stand up and do the right thing. I have no doubts about that. I was very honored and privileged to serve as many years as I did. I don't view myself as a heroic figure, even though I was at very many critical intersections where I was able to do some things that people say are heroic. I don't look at myself as that at all. There are thousands of FBI agents and employees that are much smarter than I am. They're much more talented, and I salute them for their efforts every day, day in and day out. And I think, I know that the American people and those listening particularly should be rest assured that there are people here fighting every day to do the right thing, and they will. And so to speak, and a colleague of mine said, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." And there are those people still there. But unfortunately, Director Wray, the current administration, the Trump administration, has a lot of cleanup to do. And I'm not going to throw stones at Robert Mueller. I'm not going to throw stones so much at James Comey, because I think a lot of that happened on their watch was basically caused by an agency that grew exponentially in a time of crisis. You know, the crisis that occurred in the United States, 9/11. We stood up. We doubled the size of the FBI agent population. We created this entity called Homeland Security.
Yeah.
And all of those stressors on any government bureaucracy will create inefficiencies. So those inefficiencies lend themselves to opportunities where people that want to advance their own personal agendas, as opposed to those of their best interest in the United States or the FBI, those people, unfortunately, I think in this instance, rose to the top. And they have to be weeded out, and they have to be cleaned out. The advice I have to Director Wray, and I hope you have me on in a few more podcasts, is that he's still surrounded by some of those folks that have their own interests in front of the FBI's and of the country's. He's got to be very selective on who he keeps in his inner circle, because I've seen him give testimony, and I've seen some of the people in the background, and I know them. He should not trust anyone until they're tested, and he should tread very lightly amongst these people.
Right.
And that's some of the advice I have to him.
Well, Mike, it's certainly my hope that this is the first of many. I've even titled this episode "Inside the FBI," and that's going to be the series title for all the podcasts that you and I will do. And you're certainly welcome as frequently as you'd like to join us. I think you've got quite a lot to share with the people of the United States. And there's just one thing I'm going to, pardon me for doing this, but to disagree with you on is your statements that you're not heroic. And I don't know anybody else who's been to Iraq and been a first responder at 9/11 and endured the incredible emotional and psychological torture that you have at the hands of the FBI. And we can possibly go into that in future podcasts as you are comfortable in doing it. So it's interesting to hear you give Mr. Wray the benefit of the doubt, and I think we're all hopeful that he will help turn the FBI around and get it on the straight and narrow. And I fully acknowledge your statements about the honest, brave agents within the FBI. We've spoken to many of them, yourself, Robin, Michael McMahon. But isn't there sort of an ongoing problem with the leadership of the FBI? Going back to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI seems to have frequently been in the position of obstructing investigations on behalf of the deep state. We've seen this happen in Las Vegas on October 1st with the shooting and the story changing. Is his name Aaron Russo, who was standing behind Joe Lombardo, almost coaching him through these press conferences. There are phone calls that people can hear between J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Johnson talking about controlling the investigation. We really need some way to reform the FBI so that honest people like you and Robin and Michael McMahon aren't smacked down for trying to reveal the truth and trying to reveal corruption, but it can take control and really make sure that the FBI and rogue elements within it aren't allowed to exert such control over people like yourself.
I agree. I find that over the years, the FBI has evolved into an organization where they have, where it's allowed. I'm sorry, just there's feedback in my ear, but it's fixed now. When the FBI leadership wants to drive and direct the investigations of a street agent, when the headquarters element tries to run street agents in investigation, there's where we have the problems, because we have politics and everything else coming into being.
Right.
The tip of the spear, so to speak, has to be with the street agent. Male, female, whoever's running that thing, they've got to have all the support of the local field office and the national field office to run the investigation to ground. When that support isn't there, or the inverse happens, where you have what currently apparently was happening with the Trump investigation, or happened with that with the titular head of the national headquarters element running an investigation, that can't be. You've got to let the street agents give them all the investigative tools, give them to gather the information, to let the investigation take its natural course. Mm-hmm. When the reverse happens, where headquarters is running things, you have a lot of problems. Louis Freeh, former director of the FBI, came into being. When he took over, he did the opposite of his predecessors. He went ahead and took all the headquarters program managers, reduced those positions, and pushed them all to the field. He increased the street agents. It was like this inverse pyramid, and so he reversed it. After 9/11, Robert Mueller came in, brand new guy. I think he was in charge about 3 days before 9/11 happened.
1 week, actually.
I've interacted with him hundreds of times, not on a personal basis, but indirectly. I never briefed him personally, but I know he's seen hundreds of my communications on major cases. Mm-hmm. I know that when he first took over, he kind of ran a decentralized ship where it was the street agents that ran the show. But then gradually, as the FBI doubled in size and whatnot, and unfortunately people underneath him started to develop their own power pyramids, it adversely affected his ability to do that and run the show, so to speak, or run the ship, steer the boat, so to speak, in that fashion.
What would you say is your general impression of Robert Mueller?
I always found him to be a man of impeccable integrity, very straightforward, but in his latter years, lacking in judgment about those that he surrounded himself with, his trusted lieutenants, so to speak. Unfortunately, in his latter years, he surrounded himself with a lot of people that had hidden agendas and agendas that were very self-serving. But overall, I found him to be a very honorable man, a decent man. But it's like some of those, I was called to the Hill a few months ago, and there were some very powerful folks asking me, some of the questions you're asking me about how to help reform the FBI. And I said, well, my position is, when you are in the military and you appoint general officers to command a division, let's say you appoint a general officer to run the 82nd Airborne Division or the 1st Army Division or whatever. Mm-hmm. Those generals only hold those positions for at the most 3 years. Okay, and then they change out. When you put the head of a paramilitary organization, which essentially the FBI is, it's a paramilitary organization, because it's a law enforcement abilities and the stuff to do things internationally. When you give them that a titular head of that organization unlimited authority for 10 years, these types of things happen. And in the case of Robert Mueller, they allowed that to run 12 years, which is way too long.
Crazy.
I suggested the longest it should ever be would be 5 years. And ironically, that's the policy that FBI Director Mueller instituted within the organization for supervisors. Because when he came on board, he saw throughout all of the FBI, there were individuals in charge of squads throughout all divisions. Some of them had been there 10, 15, 20 years in charge of the same squad. They developed their own power pyramid and their friends and their associates that was unshakable, and also too lend itself to nefarious activity and corruption and things along those lines. And so he came in and he instituted a policy where some people refer to it as 5 years up or out. So you could do 5 years running the squad, then you got to do a lateral or move up or step down. And I agree with that. That should be the same position with the FBI director. They shouldn't hold that slot for 10 years, and certainly not 12.
Right.
Certainly not 12.
Now, you mentioned Louis Freeh, who Robin has spoken to us about. Apparently, he's been injured. He's not well now, but he, by both you and Robin, is obviously very highly regarded as the FBI director. Louis Freeh, as people may recall, was brought in directly after William Sessions, who does not, as far as I know, have any familial relationship with Jeff Sessions, but William Sessions was the first FBI director in United States history to be fired by a president of the United States, and this occurred the day before the discovery of Vince Foster's body in Fort Marcy Park. Were you with the FBI at that time that Vince Foster died? 1993.
No, I wasn't, but I know Jeff Sessions. He was my attorney. I hired him as my attorney during the first go-round of OPRs, correct.
The current Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, was your personal attorney?
Correct.
And what's your impression of him?
He was very knowledgeable of the bureaucracy inside the Bureau, and he was very astute as to what can happen to an FBI director when they don't manage their, so to speak, lieutenants properly or keep an eye on the lieutenants. The grounds for which he was fired, I think, were very, very weak.
So wait a minute. Let me just make sure we're not getting confused, because it is very confusing. Jeff Sessions, the current Attorney General, was never the FBI director. William Sessions was the FBI director.
William Sessions, correct.
So William was your attorney, or Jeff Sessions? William Sessions.
I apologize.
No
William
problem.
Sessions.
It's easy to get confused.
Yeah.
And the two men are not related, correct?
To my knowledge, no, they're not.
Right.
No.
Is William Sessions still alive?
William Sessions works for Holland & Knight in Washington, D.C.
Boy, I'd love to speak to him. I'd love to speak to him. Just 3 days ago was the 25th anniversary of the death of Vince Foster, and I believe there still has not been an adequate investigation of that matter. Vince Foster, of course, was the White House deputy counsel, and many people believe that there's a lot of contradictory evidence in the alleged suicide of Mr. Foster. He was laying on a hill, and blood was running, and dried blood was running in 4 different directions on his face, including uphill. And the gun remained in his hand after he was dead, something that a retired NYPD detective and a U.S. Army investigator both said had never occurred in their experience of investigating gun-and-mouth suicide. So I'd be very interested in speaking to Mr. Sessions, William Sessions, about that matter. If I can redirect you for just a moment, Mike, I think there are so many members of the FBI that are becoming famous, where historically speaking, FBI agents are relatively anonymous to the public. The person I'm thinking of course, is Peter Strzok, who testified before Congress about 2 weeks ago. And I don't know if you're able to speak about this or not, but you've told me in private conversations that you've personally interacted with Peter Strzok.
only encounter I ever had with Peter Strzok was somewhere around 2011. He was a program manager in the Insider Threat Unit, and I had brought an agent, supervisory special agent that had been working for me to their office because they had uncovered a serious serious incident of mishandling of classified information. So I brought it to their attention. It was with regard to another agency, and the encounter I had, I didn't know who he was. The encounter I had with him was striking. His demeanor was very argumentative, sarcastic,
Wow.
in my face, and I thought it was a joke because I had never met this person. You know, some people just pull your leg. It's like you've never met them before, and they're just going off on you. It's like I just didn't. I was like, well, how would that guy know me? Because I don't know him, and why would he be so argumentative and so insulting? And it was later on that I found out that the FBI reopened a closed insider threat case on myself.
Whoa.
That was based on false information. Correct.
Wow.
It was based on false information, and
So
that
you're
that
really
insider
defining a
threat case
pattern
had
and
been resolved in
practice.
2009.
Sorry to interrupt
Sorry?
you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're really defining a clear pattern and practice of the way these individuals operate. If you cross them, you're on the chopping block, and they don't mind making up evidence, colluding among themselves, doing all manner of really insane things to ruin people's lives. And they're doing that to the President of the United States right now.
I can go in excruciating detail of the criminal conduct and administrative misconduct that unit, the Insider Threat Unit, had directed towards me from 2009 through 2014. And all of this was brought to the attention of the FBI's Assistant Director for Office of Professional Responsibility, half a dozen FBI agents that conducted the OPR inquiry on myself, and it was brought to the U.S. Federal Magistrate K's attention. It was brought to Federal District Court Judge Rudolph Contreras' attention, visa Judge K, and to date, nothing's been done about it. I had a very good team of attorneys that worked for me. At first, pro bono, because they saw the injustice, and then they worked pro bono the last 2 years of my case because they was so outraged at what had gone on, and they were the ones that helped me help to bring the Bureau to settlement. But the chronology of events and the timing of all the things that happened with the investigative efforts against myself ironically mirror the efforts of targeting Robin Gritz and pushing her, forcing her to basically resign under duress, and and that's a tragedy, and that's an injustice that needs to be corrected by Director Wray. He needs to assign someone in his administrative on the 7th floor administratively to look at her case. To bring her back into the FBI, allow her to help with the reformations of the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, and then eventually allow her to be retired. That's the best case scenario for the country, and Robin.
I do want to remind people,
really.
So that is a tragedy, absolutely, and I want to remind people that they can help Robin in her ongoing fight against corruption at the FBI and with her legal battle by going to her GoFundMe page, and we're showing that right now. I'm going to put the link also into the comments here on both YouTube and Periscope. Now, Mike, you're among the many that include Robin Gritz, Michael Flynn, victims of lawfare, where actually the details, the accusations, and the outcome of the case doesn't really matter because, as Robin has said, Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch has told her, the process is the punishment. The very fact that they've raised these charges and begun these legal actions against you. I mean,
Correct.
you've described an extensive legal battle that you've fought, and your employment has been impacted in the same way Robbins has. You're a highly trained, highly skilled individual. Obviously, you've told us about your military background, you've told us about your law enforcement background. This is not something that happens overnight. The U.S. government and the taxpayers that fund it have invested quite a lot in people like yourself, like Robin Gritz, like Michael Flynn. And when these vindictive individuals that you've been describing for us within the FBI basically push you guys out, it's something that should concern everyone, because you can't just pop out a counterterrorism expert overnight. And when we lose our experienced people, every one of us is at risk of a terrorist event, aren't we?
Correct. It takes years, if not decades, to build these type of individuals, and particularly to build Mike Flynn, for instance. I personally encountered Michael Flynn as a full colonel. He worked for General Stanley McChrystal, and during that time he worked for Stanley McChrystal. I was working in Special Operations Command as well. He and I were in direct email contact on counterterrorism operations. I was flattered that someone that was so close to General Flynn would be asking me direct questions instead of using some crazy bureaucratic chain, but he did. I responded as a operations support officer and someone that also had background and understanding how FBI counterterrorism operations work. And so I felt as though I was an asset to him and helping him run to ground some of the questions, some of the things we were working at the time. The bizarre irony, which should intrigue a lot of your listeners and contributes, unfortunately, to this conspiracy of the Russian conspiracy, is the fact that I was in communications with Michael Flynn via LinkedIn just prior to him being nominated as the National Security Advisor to then candidate Donald Trump.
Right.
And if you look at the chronology of events, when surveillance started to occur of Michael Flynn and of others, it's very telling that, you know, they targeted Robin, they targeted myself, all in the same broad brush stroke. And what I found ironic was the same key people that targeted Robin and I were the ones leading the investigations against Donald Trump.
Wow.
And you can't make this up. You know, there's one of the things, like, you know, life is sometimes stranger than fiction. And in Robin's case and in my case, that unfortunately is the truth. But the thing is, with regards to all this, the facts speak for themselves, the emails speak for themselves, and they're irrefutable. I mean, I can go on and on about the efforts that the FBI made against me, but not the FBI as a whole. I should say the select group for hours. But in particular, I could talk to the fact that when I was being interviewed by the Washington field office, they out and out violated my Fourth Amendment rights and other rights in full knowledge that they were breaking the law in doing so, but they felt comfortable because they said that the FBI headquarters had told them to do it.
Wow.
Key people inside the headquarters told them to do it. So they felt they had this top cover to just trample on my rights. And here's one instance. I have had representation the entire time of the Internal Affairs inquiry. So here I was being interviewed under a ruse, a guise, and a lure by investigators. And I asked them during the inquiry, is this about me or is this about someone else? And they constantly lied to me and said, no, it's not about you, it's about someone else.
Wow.
Well, you can't do that. It's illegal. You've retained counsel regarding this matter, and you're trying to circumvent it. And the other aspect is the questions that they are asking me during the inquiry were already under protective seal and court order by the Merit System Protection Board at the request of the FBI, and it was sealed. And so I said, well, I can't speak to that because it's under seal. And so they pretended to get an FBI attorney on the phone, and the attorney on the phone said, no, it's not. Tell Mr. Agent Dick that we lifted the seal. Well, I'm not an attorney by trade, and so I figured, well, maybe they had gotten permission or they had gotten an order from the Merit System Protection Board judge to lift the seal, and so okay, I can talk to it. None of that happened. None of that happened, and it was a fake. They pretended to have the attorney on the phone. So later on, a year later, when my counsel brought up to the judge's attention that this attorney lifted the seal, he said he knows about no such phone call, and he never ever lifted the seal. So you see these outright, blatant violent, and they did this to me, an individual at the time. I had served the FBI honorably for 17 years,
and they're engaging in this kind of served your entire life.
Correct. They're engaged in this criminal conduct, and the other aspect of that is that really still frustrates me is this was brought to the attention of the judicial branch, and nothing was done. Nothing was done about it.
Wow. It's really shocking, Mike. I mean, you're revealing criminal conduct. The FBI seems to be operating more like the Jerky Boys than a Federal Bureau of Investigation, having crank callers fool you into doing things. And so when we hear a soundbite on the news that General Michael Flynn is accused of lying to the FBI, we're not hearing any of the details of the types of tactics that you're describing that could have been used to coerce or otherwise deceive General Flynn into what they are categorizing as a false statement. It really is scary. And then we hear, of course, about private citizens like Paul Manafort being his door being kicked in, his home being raided, and him being detained in solitary confinement before he's even been convicted of a crime. It sounds a lot like an agency run amok, and I'm fully with you that every FBI agent that I'm meeting seems like an individual of great integrity. So there's obviously some sort of problem at the top that needs to be addressed, and I'm so pleased that after months
there's a core element of individuals that are operating outside the law, operating outside the rule of law, and they need to be held accountable. There needs to be accounting for the misconduct on the part of these individuals. Until they're held accountable, no one, I knew very few people in this country that are going to trust that are the agents, the FBI, particularly local and state law enforcement. I have colleagues that are there now that are telling me that I won't go into detail. I'm not going to quote what they're saying, but it's got to be fixed. It's got to be fixed. It's got to be made public. Director Wray has to have a full accounting. Well, we've got to do that. If not, it's going to run amok. And one of the biggest things, the biggest arrow I had in my quiver, in able to target real terrorist threats and real criminal individuals was the fear that they had of the three letters, the FBI. When you go into an interview setting and the person's already nervous because of the mystique that surrounds the Bureau, that is a very great investigative tool to help inspire someone to tell the truth.
Right.
When you lose that ability, and it's deteriorating quickly, more and more, and it's not been fixed, it's not been corrected yet. We are all in jeopardy. Our lives are in jeopardy. Public corruption takes hold. Criminal elements start to grow. Organized crime starts to grow. It gets out of hand.
Wow.
But there are thousands of loyal and dedicated and very ethical agents that took the oath and will stand up for justice. They're out there.
Absolutely.
The men and women of the FBI, this country should be proud of. There is a core element that has to be fixed, and they have to be rooted out, and they have to be held accountable. And it has to be a public accounting. It can't be a private accounting where people are allowed to retire and go off to pasture and so just slap on the wrist. There has to be an accounting. Right. There was never an accounting after 9/11 for all the missteps inside the organization.
Right.
The notices given from the Central Intelligence Agency and foreign countries about the threats of these, hijackers, those individuals that had that information and didn't handle it properly, there was no accountability. They were pushed aside, promoted, allowed to retire. There has to be a cleanup now.
Yeah.
The American people are not going to feel confident in this organization.
Of course. Let's stay on the subject of FBI directors. And of course, Director Wray is in there now. Isn't it true that Christopher Wray was involved in Robert Mueller's investigation of Enron? And people have accused them of slow-footing that investigation.
I don't know anything about that. I really honestly don't. I couldn't comment in any direction with regards to that.
I
just know that Director Wray was a distinguished prosecutor, and he served honorably at the Department of Justice. The only Achilles heel he may have that I see is personal relationships with some of the folks that worked over at Main Justice when he was there and are now inside the Bureau. And my advice to him, he has to double check those people.
Right.
Really does.
See, and my concern is that there is a sort of a systemic insulation that prevents the honest agents like yourself from really ever knowing what the nature of these relationships are and how these political appointments work. Obviously, we've heard about things being, so compartmentalized. There's been an awful lot of speculation that Peter Strzok may have been working for the CIA, actually. IntelliHub showed just last week an article indicating that Peter Strzok, let me bring this up for us here. IntelliHub, of course, is a publication that's helmed by our friend Shepard Ambellis, and they had this article talking about how Peter Strzok had the designation of section chief. Now, a section chief, as I understand it, and as the article describes, is not an FBI appointment, but rather a CIA appointment. Can you speak in a general sense about that term, section chief? Have you heard that term before?
Yes, yeah. That intel piece is a bizarre conspiracy. The section chief is just when people become section chiefs, they rise to a level of senior executive service. That's an SES position. That has nothing to do with chiefs of station or anything like that with regards to the agency. Peter Strzok, to my knowledge, he's always been an FBI employee. He's never been a CIA employee that was a detailee to the FBI. The CIA does have people at the Bureau as detailees, just as the FBI has detailees to the CIA as Robin Gritz was one.
Right.
She worked over there, and it's cross pollination, it's cross communications, and it's coordinate. It helps with coordination and things like that. But there's no nexus to that. I don't put that any. The section chief title has no connection to the CIA.
There's connection to the CIA. So your feeling is that this IntelliHub article is incorrect in its assessment.
Correct. Agree.
I see.
100%.
I see.
Yep.
So Robin had said to me that she and other agents were having a difficult time identifying when Peter Strzok entered the FBI, and no one had any FBI Academy graduation photos of him or anything like that. You don't feel that has any value?
No, I know people that know him personally, and when he entered the Bureau, yeah, I do. Okay. Yeah, he went through the Academy, just like everyone else. Yep.
Okay, interesting.
He did. He actually, when I was involuntarily mobilized into the U.S. Army, vis-a-vis Donald Rumsfeld's backdoor draft in 2005, Peter Strzok was my unit chief administratively. Mm-hmm. I was still holding a position in the FBI, but I was on active duty as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. My duty position was held under the entity that Peter Strzok ran as a unit chief. So he was my unit chief at one time. I never met him because when I returned in 2009 to the FBI, he had moved. Someone else had taken over.
Got it. So this is a very unusual situation where you were in the FBI, you had already left the Army, or you were in the Army Reserves or something like that, and then Operation, what was the story there? How did that work?
After the ground invasion into Afghanistan by the U.S. military, particularly I think it was the 101st Airborne Division, jumped into Kandahar. And incidentally, I was along the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan at the time as an FBI agent working the Daniel Pearl investigation. We're trying to win his release. We thought he was still alive.
Right.
It was just ironic. About 18 months later, I got a telegram in the mail and a set of orders telling me to report to active duty in the U.S. Army at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And without boring all the listeners the details, I was involuntarily mobilized back into the Army because my name was on a printout somewhere called the Inactive Ready Reserve, IR. And I went back into the Army. I served from 2005 to 2009. But under mobilization orders, when you are a FERS, federal employee, the losing government agency must keep your position. So I served on active duty that entire time, and then returned to the Bureau 2009. And so that's where I was doing that. That's where my interaction with Colonel Flynn and General Flynn and all that stuff happened, and General Stanley McChrystal and all that. Those very, very honorable, patriotic men. And I really feel bad for. I knew this was going to happen with General Flynn. I told this to Robin years ago, and I even have the emails about it, that he's got to be really cognizant of the fact that when the giant federal bureaucracy goes after you like that, particularly the FBI and DOJ, even though you're innocent, it can bankrupt you. And you've got to be very careful. And from what I understand, and I think it was the right decision, he pled guilty to something he probably didn't even do just to get the investigation off. And the only last thing I'll say about that with Mike Flynn cases, I'll tell your listeners, I've done hundreds, if not 1,000, counterintelligence interviews in my career, and we always come up 90% of the CI cases that I worked, and most of my colleagues work, the people are innocent, and you're allowed under the authority of law to engage in a lot of very penetrating investigative techniques to find out whether or not they're a spy. Or they're engaged in nefarious activity against the best interest of the United States. It's a national security case. The thresholds of authority, the thresholds of probable cause are extremely low because they know it's so difficult to find a spy, okay, or find the nefarious conduct or misconduct as far as national security matters are concerned. So when you do your investigation, and it sometimes runs for years, and eventually most of the time you try to bring the subject of the investigation in for an interview. If your investigation concluded, based up to that point, that they are not a nefarious individual, and they're most likely a very patriotic citizen, you do not engage in some type of an entrapment interview, which apparently is what happened here. You don't engage in that. No one does. At least none of my colleagues did, or anybody that ever worked with me or alongside me. It's unethical. And if that's the case, what happened Mike Flynn, and it appears to be, there should be an accounting. But from what I hear from the open source media, and is that the street agents that actually conducted the interview, they felt that he never lied. So that speaks volumes. So,
and when you refer to open source media, what do you mean by open source media?
Well, open source media, the news stations, the major networks have said that the interviewing agents, the street agents, the first line agents that conducted the interview, did not feel that Mike Flynn gave false testimony, which would shoot a hole in the 1001 violation that he was charged with.
Right. 18 USC 1001.
Yeah,
right.
1001. And so when Robert Mueller's team goes and charges him with that, the question I have is, where's the disconnect? If the agents are saying that and Robert Mueller's team is saying no, where's the disconnect?
Didn't James Comey himself say that he didn't feel that Mike Flynn was dishonest?
Who said that?
I believe Comey said that.
I think he did. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
it's a very surprising case.
It is.
So let me take you in another direction here for a moment, because not long ago I spoke with William Binney, who, of course, was with the NSA, not the FBI. But he described a situation that I believe permeates all of our agencies that's very problematic. And that is this private contractor situation where oftentimes people within these agencies leave their posts to form security companies and private investigation companies. And one of the examples is CrowdStrike, where former FBI, I guess he was an agent. I don't know specifically Sean Henry's credentials, but perhaps we have them right here.
Yeah.
He was
John Henry, executive assistant director.
There you go.
His last position was in charge of the Washington field office. Yeah.
So that's a pretty highly placed individual at the FBI. He goes and forms CrowdStrike. Of course, we know CrowdStrike is the only entity to have investigated on a forensic level the servers from the DNC. James Comey specifically referred to them as a trusted third party. This seems like a massive conflict of interest to have these private agencies that are started and run by former members of the intelligence world. We've heard about, I believe it's called Hacklet in the UK. We've heard about Fusion GPS, all these companies that are, paying people to make dossiers and then investigating evidence that could otherwise incriminate conspirators and criminals. What can you say about this as a general practice?
Well, I mean, these FBI executives rise to a level of expertise in their field, and they are sought after by companies in the private sector to assist them in the formation of, in this instance, Sean Henry was asked to help CrowdStrike in the formation of its cyber capabilities. Its core line of business, and I don't see anything per se wrong with it, so long as the executives that leave the Bureau aren't then using contacts at the organization to find out information. In other words, you'll see there's some criminal cases. There's actually a few FBI people criminally charged in the last 3 to 4 years where they left the FBI, went to a private sector entity, and were using their contacts in the FBI to gain information to help that new entity.
Right.
And in that sense, that's criminal. It's a criminal act.
Well,
Those are exceptions to the rule, and
right.
There's checks and balances that are built in to identify those people and take corrective action.
Well,
but
my
in this
concern
instance,
also flows in the other direction, where obviously there are certain checks and balances in place within our government to prevent the FBI from doing certain things like, obstructing justice or spoliating evidence or whatever. But when it can be done through a private company such as CrowdStrike, perhaps it takes advantage of certain loopholes that perhaps the law didn't consider. Obviously, when you're in the FBI for years and years and rise to the level of executive director or whatever it is that Sean Henry was, you know a lot about how the system works and how you can circumvent it. So I remain concerned about those things. There was this article in Fox and other outlets earlier, I think today or yesterday, where another member of the intelligence community, John Brennan, has been accused of potentially monetizing his security clearance. And it's strange that he's no longer involved in the CIA, as far as I know, but yet he maintains this security clearance. He's such a jovial and happy-looking guy. It's a face that certainly screams, "Trust me." I remain concerned about this, Mike. It's an issue that possibly needs more oversight and more regulation. I know you've got limited time, and I appreciate you sharing your time with us. We've got just a few minutes left. Was there anything else that you wanted to discuss or share with our audience before we wrap it up for this evening in what is the first of hopefully many conversations that you and I can have?
Well, I did have some questions earlier tonight from Robin and some other colleagues with regards to security clearances, and it goes to Mr. Brennan's security clearance. Uh, by and large, if an individual is under inquiry, whether administrative or criminal, at all times that clearance is supposed to be suspended by the granting agency.
Mm-hmm.
Suspended. Revocation is a more serious matter. The National Security Manual sets out clear and unequivocal guidelines for the revocation of a clearance,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to be followed. It does. Now, in Mr. Brennan's case, if he's using his position of authority and his clearance that he still has that is current to gather information for purposes that aren't authorized, then anytime his clearance can be suspended. And the only person, or the only, for sure, the only person I know that could revoke a clearance without an investigation is the president,
Mm-hmm.
commander in chief. I don't know, even general officers, I don't believe the stroke of a pen can revoke a clearance. They could suspend a clearance, but the head of the executive branch can revoke a clearance with a stroke of a pen.
Hmm. And the commenters watching right now are asking if you know if Brennan is part of the SES.
Oh yes, absolutely. He was part of the senior executive services. For him to have held that position as director of the CIA, he automatically was a senior executive.
Wow.
Held SE and SES position, but he was a political appointee. He wasn't a, yeah, he was a political appointee.
Well, there's been
And
a
that,
lot
and
of
not by happens, after the new president comes in, those political appointees all migrate out.
right.
All those
There's
folks.
been a lot of discussion. Abel Danger, Field McConnell and David Hawkins talk quite a bit about how the SES is possibly a dangerous organization. Do you feel that that could be the case?
There has to be some reforms with it. There is definitely cronyism. I mean, unfortunately, Robert Mueller, James Comey, and now Director Wray are have administrative leadership and administrative managerial challenges because of the SES formation. And I know people that worked in a special cell for Robert Mueller that would have to fact check the SESers. And on many occasions, when the SESer would come in and brief Robert Mueller on the facts and circumstances, they would take that information, give it to their administrative person to go check the facts. It would sometimes be 180 degrees difference.
Wow.
And these directors know that. There is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, James Risen, who wrote a few books. But years ago, he had interviewed me, and he got permission through the Public Affairs Office at FBI to interview me about the special cell of people that existed in Donald Rumsfeld's office. Now, James Risen took that special cell into a large conspiracy and said it was an intelligence committee cell within an intelligence cell that did nefarious things. None of that was true. And his book and his premise still pretends it is. But a lot of these organizations, the big titular heads, these directors, these folks in charge of them, they have to have fact checkers in many instances. And there probably needs to be some adjustments made to the senior executive service. But again, a lot of that can be fixed by limiting terms. When you have people go for 10 and 12 years as directors of a paramilitary organization, which the FBI is per se, you run the risk of having these types of things happen.
Right.
So
right. You had also, just real quick, you mentioned to me prior to beginning that Peter Strzok, who also I believe is within the SES, correct?
He is now, yes. Yeah, he's an SES.
So you, in your career, have never heard of an agent being suspended from his job but retaining his pay?
Correct. Yes, that one of the things we spoke to earlier tonight, and also with Robin. Peter Strzok is the first individual FBI employee I've ever heard of that was suspended with pay. I know of no one that was ever suspended without pay, because when your security clearance is placed into a suspension, you cannot perform the function to which you were hired, and then they automatically suspend your pay. In my case, the FBI suspended my pay for 2.5 years.
Wow.
2.5 years. 2.5 years.
And,
So,
and
an
even
innocent
now,
person. Yeah.
they're affecting your ability to work. You've told me it's been very difficult for you to find work.
The difficulty in me finding work surrounds a poster that was generated by a group of people and was disseminated worldwide and internationally. And that poster was an armed and dangerous poster, and it had my name, address, social security number, photograph, and a whole bunch of other things on it, and they disseminated it internationally and worldwide. And it has yet to be taken down. That's part of my settlement agreement with the Bureau, as they're supposed to have that retracted, taken down, and they haven't. So, you know, it's one of those things where you can only do so much. You can only fight the bureaucracy so much, and then you have to either give up or give in. And but unfortunately, that is the biggest Achilles heel for me still. That's out there, and that's adversely affected my life in many other ways. Personal life, family life, you can imagine.
Absolutely.
So,
and I'm just, in response to some of the comments, I'm not sharing any GoFundMe or any funding information for you, Mike, because you haven't started any such campaign, despite the financial difficulty that this wrongful persecution by the FBI has caused you. So I don't know how we can thank you for your service to the country and your integrity, your service in the military, your service in the FBI. I hope, at least to some extent, what we're able to do here with Crowdsource the Truth, by giving agents like yourself a voice and a venue to share this information, hopefully as Crowdsource the Truth grows, more and more people like you, like Robin Gritz, like Michael McMahon, and if there are other FBI agents out there who feel the need to come forward and share this information, I'm doing this because I feel like these injustices can't go on, and if we're all beholden to CNN and the Washington Post and Fox News, who incidentally broadcast that Bolo poster that you're talking about, and if I'm not mistaken, Fox retracted it, but none of the official law enforcement channels have officially retracted that. So is that the case?
yeah, Fox took down the poster, but they didn't take down the false article. The entire article is a false narrative, and they should be taken down. It basically, and we could probably get into this on another segment, because I think your readers will find very interesting how that played out, and it goes to the heart and the core of what's wrong with certain parts of the FBI today, and that need to be fixed.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate the time. I look forward to our next conversation. And I want to thank everyone for watching. I will be back tomorrow. We've got several shows tomorrow, so I'm going to go prepare for those. Thank you so much, Mike. Have a great evening.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
You have a good night.